Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for zooming in. Hope you're all well and continue to be well. Naturally, this week's Parsha concerns itself with Yaseret HaDvorim. There are many insights into really the basic constitution of the Jewish people, which is reflected in the Ten Commandments and the Yaseret HaDvorim that were given to us on Sinai. The Ramban says that the first five that were written on one of the tablets, I mean, he's addressing the problem as to why we need two tablets. Could have one tablet. What's the significance of two tablets? So the Ramban says because the first five are to be considered commandments that are bein odom lamokom, commandments that affect us in relationship to God, so to speak. And the last five on the other tablet are bein odom lachavero, regarding commandments between human beings and other human beings, and that they have, so to speak, different categories and definitions. The Torah wanted to make that clear to us, and therefore, Bein Odom Lamokom is on one of the luchos, and Bein Odom Lachavero is on the other luach. But this raises a few interesting points. The fifth commandment, the one that is the bottom one on the first of the luchot, is Kabed Esovicho Vesimecho, honoring one's parents. The question is raised by the Minchas Chinuch in his famous sefer. Is honoring one's parents a mitzvah that's bein odom lamokom, or it's a mitzvah bein odom lachavero? In other words, it is a mitzvah in relationship to God alone, so to speak, or is it a mitzvah, a social mitzvah, like not stealing from somebody, like giving charity to someone? So it's a mitzvah to honor your parents. Your parents are people, so it's a mitzvah bein odom lachavero. The fact that the Ramban lists this first set of the first division of luchos and the second division as the difference between odom lachavero and bein odom lamokom would indicate that the Ramban is of the opinion that Kabed Esovicho Vesimecho is bein odom lamokom, and not necessarily bein odom lachavero. And there's a great insight here. But we all know that the relationship between parents and children is enormously important, but it is very delicate. And I need not describe to you how many times we find that There's a great deal of resentment between parents and children. Not always a smooth road. And sometimes, God forbid, a person may have had abusive parents, whether they be verbally abusive or even physically abusive. Abusive is a relative term. In our time, when one can go to prison for striking one's child, so then the definition of abuse has become greatly expanded. In earlier generations, striking a child in order to maintain discipline was not only acceptable, it was held to be commendable. Shlomo HaMelech taught us in Mishlei that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child, meaning that the child has to have fear of the parent. Well, today he would be held as encouraging child abuse. So what about a situation where a person has nasty parents? Let's not go to abusive, but nasty parents. Parents that don't want to listen to the true wants and needs of the child. The child wants to be a musician, and the parents want the child to be an attorney. The child has a natural talent for music. The child loves music. The child wants to go to the Juilliard School of Music. The parents want him to go to the Harvard Law School. Whoever wins that battle really is going to come out a loser. Because if the child goes to Juilliard School of Music, even if the child turns out to be a great musician, there will be a resentment on the part of the parents that he could have been a greater attorney, could have been on the Supreme Court. And what if, as is the case, most people who have musical talent, that they are not necessarily the wealthiest or most successful people in the world. Few make it, but most people don't. So then the resentment will even be greater. On the other hand, if you force the child to go to the Harvard Law School, so even if the child is able to succeed and graduate and become a partner in a firm, but if the child does not like the job, if for whatever reason it doesn't appeal to him, he has to get up every morning and do something that he doesn't want to do. That he finds no satisfaction in his professional life. So then he will always resent his parents. He will always feel that they were unfair to him. So it's a very slippery slope here. It's walking on ice. And therefore, in the Talmud, the Gemara in Kedushin, for instance, attempts to define kabedas avicha v'esimecha in a very narrow sense. So the halacha is that a child that wants to go to Juilliard school is entitled to go to Juilliard school, and he doesn't have to listen to his father and go to the Harvard Law School. A parent has no right to choose the spouse of their child, male or female. But parents threaten. I mean, in my rabbinic career, that Baruch Hashem has spanned many, many decades, how many times, the parents say, I'm not going to go to your wedding if you marry her. That's a very rough way to start off in life. But the child has the right to marry anybody he wants to marry, or anyone that she wants to marry. Does not have to listen to the parents. That is not included in Kibbut Orveim. But Kibbut Orveim is defined extremely narrowly. I'm taking physical care of the parents. I'm giving them financial support. I'm not usurping their place or their seat in the house or around the dining room table. Very narrow ideas. And I think that the halacha is realistic. And in the realism of the halacha, you cannot have parents live the life of their children and expect it to work out. And we see it played out, some of the greatest Hasidic Rebbes came from families that were opposed to Hasidus, and that their parents tragically, almost violently disagreed with what they wanted to do. And we see it the other way also. And unfortunately, in our time, children who come from religious families and, God forbid, give it up. Or children that come from secular families and they end up in a kiruv yeshiva or seminary, and they become complicated. And therefore, Jews always wish for each other nachat from children and grandchildren. Nachat means peace, quiet, no fights. That's really a great achievement. Between the generations, there are no quarrels. But that's only in a situation of live and let live, where the older generation realizes that it, so to speak, had its chance and made its choices. And now comes another generation, even though it is of one's own seed, but that human being has the right to their own choices. Painful as that may be, and erroneous as it may be. I once heard from noted family therapist who said that the job of a parent is to let the child make his own mistakes. So we want to prevent that the child should make a mistake because we're older, we know better, we've been through it, we have experience. But unless one makes one's own mistakes and learns from those mistakes, then there's no room for personal growth or really for healthy personality and a level of psychology. So that's kabed asavicha v'simecha. So the Torah says, so why should you honor them? So there are three reasons that are advanced by the Meforshim. One reason is because they gave you the greatest gift. You're alive. The Gemara based on the Pasuk in Eicha, why should a live person complain? So the Gemara says, you're alive. So, what's the complaint? They gave you life. Not only that, they sustained you when you were completely defenseless. First few years of life, the child is completely dependent on parents, on the other. So it's simply an issue of hakoras hatov, of gratitude. Gratefulness. So kabed savicha v'simecha is, so to speak, hakoras hatov. It is the recognition that you've been done a great favor, and that. So sometimes. Someone does you a favor, and you may not like that person. Or you may think that that person at one time or another didn't treat you correctly. Nevertheless, now you have to say thank you for the favor that was done. That's independent of how I judge the relationship should be. So that's one aspect of kibbud av. Vein is gratitude. Hakoras hatov, which is such a fundamental idea in Jewish life, to be grateful and to be able to express that gratitude. And it has to express itself in every way possible. Be able to always say thank you for even the smallest thing. I always remember my experience with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, that I drove him once to New York from Monsey. We came to the George Washington Bridge. It was a very hot day, very long line waiting to cross the bridge. At that time, you had to pay the toll collector in cash and money. There was no easy pass, etc. So we waited in line. The car waited 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. And I was exasperated. And I pulled up and I gave him a $10 bill, which today wouldn't get you anywhere, but then it was more than sufficient. And he gave me change. And I took the change and zoomed out of the toll booth to get onto the bridge. And Rabbi Yaakov bent over and said to me, Rabbi Wein, you forgot to say thank you. You didn't say thank you to the toll guy. He gave you change. So what should I say? It's his job to give me change. That misses the whole point. The point is that someone did something for you. Anytime anyone does something for you, even if that's his position and job and profession, you have to say thank you. There's a vestige of that left in the world. For instance, if you go to a restaurant, so you leave a tip for the waiter. The waiter has to be, serves you anyway. But there it still remains that he served you. So you have to say thank you. How do you say thank you? You leave him a tip. So that's one aspect to keep it on. There's a second aspect to keep it on. Yibetzelem Elohim boro es odom. This first Tselem Elohim that we deal with in life, those are our parents. Our parents represent God to us. And especially when we are young and we're unaware of everything else that goes on in life. So then our parents are the Tselem Elohim. And that's why it says, Kabed Etzovicha V'esimecho. You have to give them honor, not because of them, but because they are the Tselem Elohim. They're the representation, at least in the early years of a child, and when the child has no other way of understanding it, they're God. They're it. So therefore, the Torah insisted that even though there may be tensions, even though there may be rough moments, even though there may even be resentment between generations, nevertheless, the parents are Tselem Elohim. They're the first and major representation to us of Tselem Elohim. And therefore, that alone serves as a valid reason why they should be honored. We know that, for instance, we honor people many times not for what they are, but for what they represent. So we honor the leader of a nation. We may despise that leader, but he is the leader. So by showing respect to him, we are really respecting the nation. There are countless examples of that. And that brings about the feeling of honor, of respect. And that impresses upon us the idea of Tselem Elohim. There's a third idea that the Meforshim discuss about Kibbut Avleim. And that's the ultimate of chesed. The ultimate expression of gratitude that a person can show. We know many, many instances where, the parents took care of the child when the child was young, and then the child has to take care of the parents when the parents are old. It's a reciprocal world. So if the task of a person in the world is to do chesed, to exhibit charity, goodness to others, well, charity begins at home. And therefore, the beginning of chesed and the ultimate chesed is not necessarily to strangers. It's to my mother and father. And again, that becomes something that's irrespective of other aspects of the relationship that may exist between the generations. If a Jew gives a donation to a poor Jew that needs his help, he does not inquire as to the person's personality, the person's genealogy. It's not a, here, here's the 10 shekel, that's what I have here, I give it to you. I hope it helps you. Well, that's the relationship to one's parents too. It's an unconditional chesed. Now, all of this together creates a great burden on a person. Chazal are of the opinion that kibbut vein is the most difficult mitzvah in the Torah to fulfill. It's simply because of the emotional baggage that is involved in the relationship between generations. So Abaye, for instance, the great Amora, was an orphan. His father died before he was born, and his mother died in childbirth. He was raised by his aunt, by Rav Nachman's wife. We find in the Gemara, he always says, Omer Li'ein, my mother told me. He means not his natural mother, but his aunt who raised him. But Abaye makes the startling statement. He said, since I didn't have a father, I didn't have a mother, I never had to worry about kibbut vein. Was a benefit to me, because otherwise, he said, I never could fulfill the mitzvah. It is of such a nature and so demanding that I couldn't have done it. So this way the Lord spared me. But the Rebbeinu Shalom does not impose upon us tasks that we cannot fulfill, mitzvahs that we cannot observe, challenges that we cannot overcome. That's not the nature of heaven. That's not how heaven deals with us. Therefore, the Talmud had to define it in its narrowest terms, which we can all accomplish. Stand up for my father and make sure that he's clothed, to make sure he has what to eat, etc. That I can do. The broad ramifications, the universal idea that's involved, the emotional demands, that the Gemara said is not part of the mitzvah, because that would be an area where failure would be rampant. So the Ramban said that this was Beinoram Lamoko. That's the universal area of Kibbutz Avein. The narrow part, that's Beinoram Lachavera. But the Torah wants us to appreciate all of that, and therefore it's included in the Aseret Advar. I want to thank you all for listening and for Zooming. I hope next week, maybe God willing, we'll be able to open the shul. And Saturday night, we have the lecture, 8 o'clock. I hope to see you then. Have a Shabbat Shalom. Cold too.